have whipped themselves up, a portion of this generation, into believing literally that they are going to burn to death within their lifetimes.
But welcome back for now to protesters from Just Stop Oil, who spent 11 days demonstrating in London, blocking roads, throwing paint at shops and restaurants. Today, a fire engine and an ambulance were briefly caught up in their blockade, prompting the British government to say this kind of protest isn't acceptable. Well, Jenny Cleveland's still with me. I'm joined by the TalkTV contributor, Richard Tice, and from Just Stop Oil, James Skeet. Mr. Skeet, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate it. At what point, when you're blocking fire engines and ambulances, are you concerned about lives being lost by what you're doing?
Well, the whole reason we're doing this is because we're concerned about the lives of the
But
British
you get the
people.
irony that if you're actually stopping ambulances and fire engines going to save people's lives, they may actually die because of your protest.
Well, actually, we have a blue light policy. We let through every emergency vehicle.
But you didn't know,
and
did you?
if you actually cared to run the whole footage there, you'd see that that ambulance is advised by one of our people to avoid the roadblock. And
why don't you do the sensible thing and just get out of the way? You have no right. You have absolutely no right to obstruct other people's daily lives. You have the right to protest on the side of the street. You are unlawfully in the middle of the street. It's utterly outrageous. It's selfish, and you are putting people's lives at risk.
I appreciate your frustration. I understand that. I empathise with that. But look, we are demanding that the government halt any new licensing and consents for any fossil fuel exploration in the UK. Now, you know that that needs to happen. I know that needs to happen. It does need to happen.
It doesn't need to happen.
Look,
we need fossil fuels.
If we need to ensure...
There are billions of people living on this planet.
The United Nations and the International Energy Agency agree with me on this.
Leading longer, happier, healthier lives because of cheap energy from fossil fuels. You want to kill billions of people.
You can't get cheaper than free, all right? OK? Renewables are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels.
Renewables not free. We spend 15 billion subsidising renewables in this country.
We spend £236 million a week subsidising the fossil fuel industry.
Sorry, James.
What you're saying is a lie.
Just to bring you back, it's actually my show and I'm doing the interview with you.
I know, Piers. I'll happily talk to you.
Well jumped in, Mr. Tice. And by the way, he's not frustrated, he's furious, right? My question remains, though, with you. Where is your moral line with this? You say you want to save lives, and yet your actions are bordering on potentially costing lives. You cannot get in the way of emergency services in the way that you're doing. And if you do want to, explain the moral difference between what you're doing and what you complain everyone's doing about the planet.
Well, I mean, look, if we want to talk about disruption, and earlier...
No, I want to talk to you about the... I want you to answer the question.
40 degrees C. Right. As a result of that, the London Fire Brigade had their busiest day since the Blitz, OK? 60 UK families lost their houses in wildfires. Why are we not talking about the big picture?
I understand.
Why are we concentrating on such a small bit of disruption?
You think it's small?
A bit of traffic disruption is nothing in comparison to what's coming, Piers, and you know it.
James,
you know it.
You think it's small? I say to you, you have no idea the damage you're doing when you get in the way of emergency services.
As I say, we have a blue light policy.
My question is,
no emergency vehicles have been held up.
Why are the lives of the people who you're putting at risk by stopping those fire engines?
Why are you manipulating your audience?
Let me finish my question.
Why are you misframing
Let me finish my question. Why are the lives of the people whose lives may be affected by your actions today, why are they less important to you than the lives that you say will be cost by not taking climate change more seriously?
I value everyone's life. We all value everyone's life. Absolutely.
Stop lying in front of emergency services.
For the record, I agree with you. I think it's ridiculous that it's down to nurses, doctors, bartenders and whatnot to be going out in the street and demanding what the government should just be doing anyway, right? This is a no-brainer.
Yeah, but James,
just on the side.
All right, let's bring in Jenny.
Because it wouldn't work.
Wait. I'm not saying I'm against your cause. I'm really getting against your methodology.
But it works, doesn't it?
I don't think it does.
Open a history book.
I don't think it does.
The suffragettes.
It doesn't work.
We're highly disruptive. Civil rights movement, highly disruptive. Gay rights, highly disruptive. You know it works. You're a journalist. You've done your research. You know this.
Let me finish.
We wouldn't be on here if this disruption hadn't happened, would we?
I don't think it works when you're lying in front of emergency services. I don't. You will lose the British public. And my concern for you guys is that you keep thinking any disruption is valid and any disruption works. And I'm saying to you, yes, you're on this show, but you're on this show because people are absolutely furious that you got in the way of ambulances and fire engines. And I say you can do both, can't you? You can make vociferous protests, but you don't have to get in the way of things that are saving people's lives.
Why don't you tell your audience about the actual disruption that's coming down the line? Why don't you bring qualified climate scientists on here to explain what civilizational collapse looks like, all right? We've lost a third of our wheat yields this year. We're projected to lose 50% of our potato harvest. If it's this bad in 2022, how bad is it going to be in 2050? You know, if we have food shortages, that leads to riots and civilizational collapse.
I'm sorry,
but you're objectively wrong. You're objectively wrong, and you are lying. You are lying.
Are you going to let me
Our wheat
finish?
yields are down a third.
Our agriculture yields across the whole of the world
40 degrees
have
C in this
increased.
country.
And it was lovely. It meant I didn't have to go abroad.
It hit 40. You deranged. It hit 40 degrees C.
Are you selfish? Why do you want to protest in front of people?
Because we have no
Stop
choice.
people.
Because we're in a dire
choice.
situation, and you need to pay attention to what's happening.
Because at the moment, on the side of the
because
road.
at the moment you are not paying attention to what's happening.
Absolutely paying attention.
All right, but here, okay, but look, I mean, look, here you have a woman who's tried to say goodbye to her mum, who's 90 years old. It would be the most important day potentially you've ever had in your life, I would think. And ends up with 10 minutes, a funeral lasting 10 minutes for her mother. And that's directly because of the Stop the Oil protests, which shut down the motorway. The best friend of her mother couldn't even get there to say goodbye to her great friend. Do you feel any sense of remorse about that when you hear it?
I mean, listen, firstly, my deepest condolences as well. I think the problem is here is you were talking about electing and re-electing governments, but we don't have the time for that. So if we're talking about the net zero targets that the government have put in place, which the judiciary have just ruled unlawful, that's in 28 years' time. And our country is burning. OK, we've literally seen that this week. We've seen people die because of the heat, and it's just going to get worse. The whole of Europe is burning and is on fire.
And there are ways to make that point. There are ways to make that point.
What we have
and
to do is generate the political will. We're talking about determining how many people are going to die and suffer over the coming decades. We're talking about, you know, what kind of a future your children,
would you replace,
my generation are going to have.
Right
because
now?
Our government don't care right now.
I mean, how draconian would you be? Would you cut the oil off right now?
What we're saying is no new oil and gas. So
right.
by the government,
if it was down to you, would you cut it off right now?
No, that would be total chaos. But by the government's own reports, we have 8 years of oil and gas reserves left. That's plenty of time to transition away from that into something that's sustainable and that actually gives our generation a future. I mean, we're already seeing the impacts. This isn't something that's going to happen in 10, 20 years' time. It's happening now.
Do you really think members of the public are going to listen in any way, shape or form to you when you do the accent that you do and you're breaking the law? So how can you give any advice that's compelling or build an argument and bring people into that argument and try and persuade them when you're actually going about...
This is the point, you see. So I think my overriding view of these people is the more of this they do, whatever the merits of the cause that they're fighting for, which is climate change and about the over-excessive use of oil around the world, it's eroding by the second with these acts of childish, petty, pathetic vandalism. Am I wrong? Does anyone want to defend these people?
Well, I'd personally say that I agree that that kind of act is not helpful for the cause at all. It makes it look like it's all a kind of teenage protest and a kind of sulky teenager pouting, if you like. But at the same time, I think that it also reflects deep concern about what the UK is going to do next on this front. The UK did have a pretty sensible set of policies. One of the many things that appeared to be happening under Truss was that some of these were being reversed. And so at the same time as saying that this kind of act, pouring milk down in the supermarkets, is pretty dumb, it's equally dumb to not have some kind of coherent government policy to switch rapidly to renewable energy.
I mean, these things can both be true. I mean, my view about the renewable energy of the fossil fuels is you can't do it all in one go. Nope. And my God, we've discovered this year that the energy situation is pretty desperate for everyone. And in the short term, we need fossil fuels just to survive. Sure. But we are going to have to try as a planet to move to renewables. The issue at the moment is cost and availability, right?
Yes, absolutely. But I don't think that these guys should be part of that debate. That's a serious debate for serious people. And when I look at that picture of them throwing paint at Van Gogh sunflowers, I felt anger internally, and that's what they wanted me to feel. If you think about their protests, attacking the cenotaph, dumping a bucket of faeces over a statue of Captain Tom, they are not actually as childish as you think. They are carefully designed to provoke an emotional reaction of fury in the British people.
It's a bit like when the vegans start, the extreme vegans start shrieking away and doing mad things. It makes me want to go and order a Big Mac. If you're young and you're angry about what's going on, and you believe a lot of eminent scientists who say we are facing potential catastrophe, and you think your government is not stepping up, then what are you left to do?
You should stand for election. It's the idea that because people aren't listening, we have the right to stop other people going about their law-abiding business and to force governments to do something. They say we need a conversation. We talk incessantly about this issue.
Let's bring in Douglas,
Also, Piers, if I can say so, who are the people you would go to last for some long-term projections? I would have said people who'd been on the planet the least amount of time. We're talking here about people who don't know that it was hot in the 1970s in the summer. 1976 was a pretty hot summer. They have been told, they have whipped themselves up, a portion of this generation, into believing literally that they are going to burn to death within their lifetimes. They are lying to themselves and lying to other people. They are whipping themselves up into a fury. And here's the thing. There are actually consequences from the adults listening to the kids. Look what's happening in Germany and in France. Look at the dependency on Russian gas. Look at the way in which France and Germany, through short-termist, green-imbued policies, have ended up, firstly, being completely in hock to Vladimir Putin, and secondly, seeing what many of us said was going to be the consequence all along. Look at the German Green Party. That's one of these radical parties. Recently, they've had to admit, oh, we do need oil and gas. Then the next step they're going to have to do is, oh, we need nuclear. Yes, because that's what happens when you grow up and learn.
OK, let's bring in Jenny. I mean, you can see what's happening in Sri Lanka, for example, where the government came in and they tried to go down a very aggressive green policy route, and now you've got all hell breaking loose.
Well, that's because the economy is in a state. I would say that young people are the people who are going to have to live with the consequences of our inaction. That is the truth of it. They are.
I'm planning to live quite a long time.
Yes, but they're going to live longer than you. People who are younger than you will live longer.
I don't know the state of a lot of them.
And I think they have a right to feel very frustrated. There are a lot of vested interests in the world whose priority is not tackling climate change. We don't want to be dependent on countries that are quite grubby, countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia. We need to find alternative sources of energy for a variety of political reasons as well as environmental
reasons. Most people don't want to burn to death. Most people don't want to burn to death. They're not going to either. The problem here is we're talking about young kids who have been indoctrinated into an incredibly extreme ideology. As I say, we would have recognized them during the Protestant Reformation. We'd have recognized them during the Inquisition. These are people who believe they need to do anything to achieve their goals because they honestly believe they're going to go to hellfire in the next 6 months. All of their time trajectories keep on being proven wrong. All of their methodology does nothing but irritate the general public. And all of their claims about the speed with which we can get off fossil fuels are flat out wrong.
Richard, you're not really a believer in climate change, are you?
No, of course I am. I mean, there's no question that the climate has changed since the year dot, Piers, and it will always continue to change. And we, quite rightly, as John has just said, we're in a warming phase.
But we're in a rapidly accelerating warming phase.
But what was interesting about the link to 1976 was back then we had 16 consecutive days of over 30 degrees. Including 5 days of over 35 degrees. So we had a longer period of very hot weather almost half a century ago. Now we're getting what looks like essentially short-term spikes. But interestingly, back in the 70s, there was more concern about global cooling than global warming. So we're clearly in a cycle, a warming cycle. That's indisputable. My point about climate change is, look, it's been here since the year dot. It will always be here. We should absolutely affect what we can affect, which is emissions. There are many parts of climate change, of course, that actually we can have no impact on. For example, solar variability, volcanic activity, sea level oscillation. These are massive things, totally out with our control.
When you have the vast majority of scientists saying this planet is heating to a dangerous level where we could potentially end up with the extinction of the planet, do you believe them?
But I think we all know that we are in a warming phase.
And but do you believe them when they say this could be the end, warming phase?
I think that, look, that may be overstating it. There's no question we're in a warming phase.
It's a big may. Bring Joe here. All right, let me ask you, what's your view about this?
Well, when I hear views like this and words like warming phase, I feel like, I don't know if you've seen the film Wall-E, but I feel like we're in some sort of archive in some futuristic film where they look back on how people spoke in that.
Well, there was a movie came out last year which was a spoof of all this.
Yes, I feel like
with DiCaprio, and it was brilliant, but it did feel a bit like that's what's going on. And I think it's driven a lot by social media, isn't it?
It is.
You see the same people that were saying COVID's just a flu, and they're out again with their flags and they're waving this down as well.
I think people see what they want to see. People see what they want to see, and people want to have this illusion that we can control everything, and this feeling like everything is out of control. When I looked at the weather forecast last week for where I live and saw 40 degrees, it really frightened me because we always feel like climate change is something, or the climate emergency is on the horizon. But we're living in it. We have, you know, railways saying, the National Rail saying we have to re-engineer the railways, water companies putting out warnings. This is it now. And I think we can't dress this up in we're in a warming cycle. I mean, this is it. We're living in it now.
OK, let's just...
Well, the reality is we don't know that. We're clearly in a warming cycle.
We don't, but what we do know is that the vast majority of top scientists are all predicting pretty much the same thing if we don't, as a planet, get our act together.
But the point is there are many parts of climate change that the reality is we cannot control at all, as I just touched on. There are parts that we can do, like emissions reduction, and we should be doing that. And actually, I think we're making positive steps towards that.